In today's episode, we're looking at crocodile encounters fueled by a deadly sense of security. From a teacher who did the one thing no local should ever do in croc country, to a father whose refusal to see the danger cost him everything during a family picnic. But first, we go to the Wenlock River, where a man was snapped from his kayak by a deadly crocodile. It was May 22nd, 2016, and the Wenlock River carved its ancient path through the remote wilderness of Cape York Peninsula, where the muddy waters concealed submerged banks, deep scour holes, and animal travel corridors that had claimed lives for decades. The late afternoon sun cast low-angle glare across the surface, flattening depth perception and masking surface disturbances, creating conditions that favored ambush along the river's margins. Kellen Jory had worked as a warehouse safety officer in Cairns for 6 years, building a reputation for systematic risk assessment and careful protocol enforcement. At 29, he was accustomed to identifying hazards in controlled environments, particularly mechanical and procedural failures, and had logged dozens of solo kayaking trips across North Queensland rivers without prior incident. In the weeks leading up to this trip, he scheduled several days off and planned a solo paddle during the early dry season, when river levels begin to fall and wildlife concentrates around permanent water. Kellen chose the Wenlock because not many people paddled the upper parts of the river. That meant less boat traffic, but it also meant more wildlife and fewer disturbances. Friends warned him about the saltwater crocodiles in Cape York, but he had only ever seen them from far away, never up close. He told others he would stay in the middle of the river and away from the banks, which many paddlers believe is safer, although Queensland wildlife authorities specifically advise keeping a wide distance, at least 16 feet, from riverbanks, especially near undercut sections and slide marks. The safety rules he followed at work didn't carry over to a river where danger can stay hidden and move in seconds. The Wenlock River supports a stable population of saltwater crocodiles, with deep pools, undercut banks, and abundant prey, providing reliable hunting territory. Mature males can exceed 16 to 18 feet in length and weigh over 1,500 pounds. Their bite force has been measured at more than 3,000 pounds per square inch, sufficient to fracture bone and crush small watercraft hulls made of thin polyethylene. In turbid water, crocodiles often position themselves along shaded banks or beneath undercut ledges, exposing only the eyes and nostrils, while remaining motionless for long periods. Field observations show that ambush strikes are typically launched from within a few feet of the water's edge, targeting animals that pass close to the bank. As Kellen paddled downstream, he kept an easy, steady rhythm, dipping the blade into the dark water and pulling through in smooth, controlled strokes. The current was slow, offering little resistance against the bow. Along the left bank, fresh slide marks cut through the mud, wide, smooth channels where something heavy had moved from land into the water. The surrounding mud was pressed into long arcs, the edges still damp and sharply defined. He glanced toward them and casually commented that they looked like pig tracks, then continued without slowing. The surface remained flat and windless, disturbed only by the quiet entry and exit of his paddle. In conditions that calm, even minor vibrations carry efficiently through the water. Ahead, overhanging branches narrowed the channel into a shaded tunnel, sunlight breaking through in thin strips across the surface. To avoid clipping the limbs, he adjusted his line toward the right bank, guiding the kayak to within roughly 3 to 4 feet of the muddy edge. The bend tightened gradually. Erosion had eaten into the bank, carving a hollow beneath the surface where soil hung over a darker pocket of water. From above, the undercut appeared as a simple shadow. Beneath it, a large saltwater crocodile held position. Only the top of its skull and nostrils intermittently broke the surface, blending with floating leaves and glare. The animal was later estimated by wildlife officers at approximately 15 feet in length, based on trap measurements taken after removal. Its body remained almost entirely submerged, aligned parallel to the bank. As the kayak drifted past the undercut, it entered the animal's strike range, within a few feet of the bank. The water near the hull remained smooth until the final instant. The attack began as a sudden upward surge from beneath the right side of the kayak. The surface erupted in a burst of brown water and foam. A sharp cracking sound cut through the quiet as the hull flexed under impact. Rather than a clean bite through the center, the crocodile's jaws struck high along the cockpit rim, a common target point when attacking floating objects near the surface. The plastic compressed inward with a hollow snap. The force lifted the kayak's right side abruptly, tilting it toward the muddy bank. Kellen's weight shifted without warning. His paddle struck the water at an awkward angle, glanced off the surface, and slipped from his grip. The kayak rolled harder to the side as the crocodile's mass drove into it from below and slightly behind, using forward thrust to destabilize the narrow hull. Water poured over the edge as the craft tipped past its balance point. Kellen reached outward to brace himself, but the angle steepened too quickly. The crocodile lunged again, this time seizing his lower body as he fell from the seat into knee-deep water along the shoreline. Its jaws closed across his thighs, a typical strike zone when prey enters the water near the bank. The animal immediately pulled backward with rotational force. The plastic hull cracked along an existing stress line near the cockpit as the crocodile's weight dragged it sideways. From first impact to submersion, the sequence lasted only seconds. The kayak flipped completely, slammed upside down against the surface, and split along its weakened seam. One half was pulled briefly beneath the water before breaking free. The other drifted several yards downstream. Below the surface, the crocodile rotated along its long axis in a rolling motion. The twisting force pulled Kellen sideways and downward. Large crocodiles use this maneuver to destabilize and drown prey. The spinning stirred heavy sediment from the riverbed, clouding the water to near zero visibility. Severe crushing trauma to the upper legs would have caused extensive soft tissue damage and likely fractured the femur or pelvis. Such injuries can disrupt major blood vessels, including the femoral arteries, leading to rapid external and internal bleeding. As he was held underwater, involuntary inhalation of water would occur once the airway was submerged. The crocodile maintained its grip and pressed downward beneath the overhang. At the surface, the river churned briefly. Brown foam and bubbles rose, then flattened. Fragments of plastic surfaced and drifted. The paddle spun once before catching against a snag. Underwater, the crocodile remained close to the bank. Saltwater crocodiles commonly hold prey submerged until movement stops. Coordinated movement ceased quickly. Massive blood loss combined with forced submersion can cause loss of consciousness in well under a minute, particularly when the airway remains underwater. The crocodile did not resurface with visible prey. Instead, it held beneath the undercut bank in deeper water, out of sight. Within seconds, the river returned to a flat, undisturbed surface. Small fragments of debris drifted slowly with the current. Two recreational fishermen positioned downstream heard a sharp cracking sound carry from the bend. Moments later, they saw pieces of plastic moving past them in the current. No kayak remained upright. One of the men stood and scanned the shaded narrowing of the channel, focusing on the overhanging bank, but the surface showed no ripples or signs of struggle. They waited, expecting someone to surface. When nothing appeared, they moved toward higher ground along the bank to improve reception and contacted emergency services, reporting drifting debris and a suspected crocodile strike near the bend. Rangers and local responders reached the nearest access track approximately 75 minutes later. Standard protocol in crocodile-inhabited waterways requires visual assessment before entering the water. Officers scanned the banks and waited for additional personnel before approaching the undercut area. Because crocodiles may remain near a kill site, water entry was delayed until the area could be secured. The damaged kayak was retrieved first. Search efforts the following day located remains beneath the bank consistent with a large crocodile attack, including crushing trauma and tissue loss, typical of drowning and rotational feeding behavior. Wildlife officers later trapped and removed a large male crocodile from the immediate area, measuring approximately 15 feet in length. Regional reporting referenced the fatal wildlife encounter without releasing graphic details. The affected stretch of river was updated on local advisory maps with stronger warnings regarding saltwater crocodile activity. The coroner's report concluded that death resulted from catastrophic lower body trauma with rapid blood loss, followed by drowning. Medical findings determined that loss of consciousness would have occurred quickly due to combined vascular injury and hypoxia. The injuries in sequence were consistent with documented saltwater crocodile attacks in northern Australia, where proximity to undercut banks significantly increases strike risk. But solo paddlers weren't the only ones caught off guard by how quickly saltwater crocodiles can strike. In the Northern Territory, a routine school excursion at a river crossing would end just as abruptly, with far more witnesses and no chance to intervene. It was August 19, 2014, at the Daly River crossing in Australia's Northern Territory, where a routine school stop ended in a fatal crocodile attack. In the muddy shallows near the bank, students had been rinsing dirt from their shoes when a backpack slipped into the water. A substitute teacher stepped in to retrieve it and did not return. A saltwater crocodile, concealed in the turbid edge of a river long marked as high risk, struck without warning. Davin Rohn had been working as a substitute teacher around Catherine for 2 years, building a reputation for reliability and calm classroom control. At 34, he regularly covered classes on short notice, often stepping into unfamiliar routines with minimal preparation. His background included outdoor education coursework and prior supervision of school excursions. primarily in fenced reserves and managed parkland, rather than unfenced tropical river crossings in known saltwater crocodile habitat. The excursion to the daily river crossing had been scheduled by the regular classroom teacher, who called in sick the morning of the trip. Davin was left supervising a mixed age group of 23 students with a single volunteer parent chaperone. The lesson plan focused on river ecosystems and water flow, and the route included a rural crossing that locals sometimes used during the dry season. This seasonal use had normalized the location, despite permanent crocodile warning signage, which authorities in northern Australia maintain year-round, because saltwater crocodiles occupy rivers in both wet and dry seasons. The Daly River system supports a stable population of large saltwater crocodiles, sustained by deep channels, undercut banks, and abundant prey. Adult males commonly exceed 14 to 17 feet in length, with some documented above that range. Their ambush strategy relies on remaining submerged along eroded banks or drop-offs, launching forward with explosive acceleration powered by the tail. Attacks typically involve a single high-force bite followed by immediate submersion, reducing surface movement and limiting resistance. As the bus stopped near the crossing, Davin directed students to remain clustered away from the waterline. Several children complained about thick mud caked onto their shoes from the walk. One suggested rinsing them in the shallows. The volunteer chaperone was occupied managing permission slips and handing out snacks. With the class spread across uneven ground, Davin focused on maintaining visual control of the group rather than scanning the water surface and bank edges. After a brief pause, Davin allowed a limited shoe rinse near the edge, repeating instructions for everyone to stay clear of deeper water. Students clustered along the bank, some crouching to splash mud from their sneakers. Davin stood slightly ahead of the group, closest to the drop-off, placing himself between the students and the darker channel water. A backpack resting on a flat rock shifted when a student nudged it with a foot. The rock tilted, and the bag slid down the muddy slope, splashing into ankle to shin-deep water near a section where the bank had eroded. That stretch formed a shallow shelf that ended abruptly in a deeper cut carved by seasonal flow. The water there changed color from light brown to a darker tone within a few feet. Davin stepped forward immediately, moving past the shelf to grab the floating strap before it drifted farther out. As he leaned toward the bag, his boots sank slightly into soft mud. One foot crossed the subtle lip where the shelf dropped into deeper water. The surface remained calm. A thin layer of sediment drifted near the edge. Saltwater crocodiles are known to hold position along banks with only their eyes and nostrils above water, often aligning with shadows and overhanging roots to break up their outline. Its body lay angled parallel to the shore, concealed by murky water and the overhang of roots. Rangers later estimated the crocodile measured approximately 15 to 16 feet long. That estimate was based on slide marks pressed into the mud, the width of tracks left on the bank, and the spacing between puncture wounds documented during recovery. At the moment of contact, it produced no warning display. There was no tail slap or hiss. The water did not churn beforehand. The strike followed the pattern documented in riverbank ambushes, where movement at the edge triggers a short, direct lunge. The crocodile surged forward in a straight-line burst that lasted only seconds, a movement later reconstructed by wildlife officers using track displacement in the mud and the measured strike distance from the water's edge. Its head lifted just enough to clear the eroded bank before its jaws closed around Davin's upper thigh and hip. Several witnesses described hearing a sharp, cracking snap, separate from the splash, consistent with heavy jaws clamping onto bone and muscle. The initial impact pulled Davin off his planted foot instantly. His hands shot toward the bank, fingers digging into mud and sparse grass, but the rain-soaked soil tore away in clumps as his weight shifted forward. As the crocodile locked its grip, its tail swept powerfully from side to side beneath the surface. Investigators later noted that this lateral sweep likely generated the thrust needed to drag both bodies off the shallow shelf and into deeper water. Davin's lower body was pulled ahead while his torso twisted sharply, forcing his spine into an unnatural angle. One arm struck the surface hard enough to spray water outward before disappearing. Witnesses several yards back said that was the last clear human movement they saw before the water closed over him. Within seconds of the bite, the crocodile initiated a tight rotational movement commonly referred to as a death roll. The motion was compact rather than extended, consistent with attacks intended to incapacitate rather than dismember. Witnesses described the water erupting in a short, violent churn, with both bodies turning beneath the surface in a confined arc. Sediment and debris were forced upward almost immediately, collapsing visibility. Based on the brief duration of surface disturbance, investigators concluded the rotation involved only a few revolutions before full submersion. Medical assessment later determined that the initial bite pattern was consistent with fractures to the upper femur or disruption of the pelvic ring. Crushing force in that region can tear surrounding muscle, compromise major blood vessels, and cause rapid internal and external bleeding. Such injuries are known to result in immediate loss of coordinated movement. Sudden submersion into deeper water further reduced any ability to resist or orient. There was no prolonged struggle visible at the surface, a detail noted independently by multiple witnesses. The water clouded rapidly as sediment from the riverbed rose in thick plumes, turning the area opaque within seconds. The crocodile maintained its grip and angled downward toward the deeper channel adjacent to the crossing. Wildlife officers later stated that this behavior aligns with documented saltwater crocodile attacks, in which prey is pulled below the surface and held under using body mass and jaw pressure to prevent resurfacing before repositioning. Approximately 20 seconds after the strike, surface disturbance diminished. The water flattened, leaving only faint ripples spreading outward from the point of entry. The backpack floated briefly where it had fallen, drifting slowly toward the darker channel before tipping and partially submerging. No further movement was observed at the surface. Students stepped back and ran toward the bus parked uphill. The parent chaperone shouted for everyone to move away from the edge and immediately dialed emergency services. Another adult who had remained near the bus gathered the students, directing them farther from the riverbank and conducting a head count. The river surface remained still. No further movement was visible. The channel returned to its earlier calm appearance, broken only by floating debris and the slow current moving past the eroded bank. Due to the remote location, police and wildlife rangers arrived approximately 40 minutes later, a response time consistent with rural Northern Territory distances. Officers assessed the bank for slide marks and entry points before specialized personnel entered the water from a boat positioned away from the original strike area. Operations were slowed by current, fading daylight, and confirmed crocodile activity in the vicinity. Davin's body was recovered later that evening from deeper water downstream of the crossing. Examination documented crushing trauma to the pelvis and upper leg consistent with a large crocodile bite, along with water in the airways consistent with drowning. Identification was confirmed through clothing and personal items. The crocodile involved was not captured, which is not uncommon in open river systems where multiple large animals are present. In the weeks that followed, the school district issued directives prohibiting excursions near unfenced waterways without region-specific wildlife safety training and formal risk assessment. These changes were distributed through administrative channels. Media coverage remained local and brief. The coroner's findings listed fatal blunt force trauma due to crocodile attack with associated drowning as the cause of death, noting that incapacitation would have occurred rapidly following the initial bite and submersion. Yet controlled settings and warning signs offered little protection elsewhere. Thousands of miles away, in South Africa's St. Lucia estuary, a father stepping into shallow water during a family celebration would trigger a similarly rapid ambush. It was December 7, 2017, a child's birthday at the edge of the St. Lucia estuary in South Africa's Isimangaliso Wetland Park turned deadly. What began as an afternoon gathering beside brown, slow-moving water ended in less than 2 minutes. A father stepped into the shallows to show that the water was safe. Moments later, a large Nile crocodile struck from deeper water. In front of his family, he was pulled under and did not resurface. The sequence matched documented ambush patterns in that region. Sibuso Ndlovu was 38 years old and had worked for 12 years as a delivery fleet supervisor in Mpangeni. His job required coordination, route planning, and oversight of drivers moving goods across regional highways. Co-workers described him as reliable and organized, someone who handled pressure without raising his voice. Within his extended family, he often took on a similar role during gatherings, directing parking, arranging chairs, keeping track of children near roads or open areas. At events involving water or outdoor spaces, he tended to stand close to where activity was happening, rather than sitting apart. The celebration that afternoon was for his 8-year-old daughter. Relatives arrived with coolers, folding tables, and balloons. The chosen location along the estuary provided tree shade and a gently sloped shoreline where people commonly rinsed their feet or stood in the shallows to cool down. Weather records from that day show temperatures above 90 degrees Fahrenheit with high humidity. Under those conditions, even brief contact with water offered relief. Warning signs about crocodiles were posted near the access path, though several were weathered and partly covered by vegetation. The St. Lucia estuary supports a large Nile crocodile population. Despite posted notices, it was not unusual to see fishermen wading knee-deep or children standing near the water's edge during daylight. On that afternoon, several people who were not part of the birthday group were already in the shallows. The estuary's brackish water, steady fish supply, and gradual banks support large crocodiles. Adult male Nile crocodiles in this system commonly measure between 13 and 16 feet long and can weigh more than 1,000 pounds. They typically remain still or move slowly below the surface and strike when prey enters range. They are capable of short bursts of speed in water, but ambush at close distance is their usual hunting method. The water in that section was brown with suspended sediment, and underwater visibility was less than 1 foot. During the gathering, a relative mentioned crocodiles and gestured toward the brown, slow-moving water. Sibuso glanced in that direction, but pointed toward fishermen farther downstream, and 2 children already standing knee-deep near the reeds, suggesting the area was safe enough. Sandals were scattered along the muddy bank. Plastic chairs sat beneath low trees where adults talked and watched. A few children knelt at the edge, trailing their hands through the surface, splashing without concern. Sibuso stepped forward into the shallows. The first steps were cautious. Water covered his ankles, then his shins. The riverbed felt firm at first, packed sand layered with silt, but the texture shifted as he moved farther out. Estuary banks erode unevenly, and what appears gradual from shore can drop without warning. Within 3 or 4 steps, the water rose from below his knees to mid-thigh. Another step forward, and it climbed to his waist. The transition was sudden, where a shallow shelf gave way to a deeper channel carved by current. He paused there, adjusting his footing as sediment loosened under his weight. Small ripples spread outward in widening circles. He turned slightly toward shore and lifted one hand in a relaxed, reassuring gesture. Behind him, in water that showed only faint surface movement, a low ripple formed and then faded. In murky estuary water, such a disturbance can blend with normal surface patterns. A crocodile can approach with most of its body submerged, using slow tail strokes that create little splash. Sibuso remained facing the bank. His right hip and leg were angled toward deeper water. The waterline sat just below his belt. He shifted his weight slightly. The attack happened in a fraction of a second. A surge of water rose behind and to his right. The crocodile lunged upward from below, jaws open, driven by a strong tail thrust. Its snout broke the surface first, followed by its head and part of its upper body. The jaws clamped onto his upper thigh and hip, twisting his body sideways. His upper body pitched backward, while his legs were pulled laterally. The force knocked him off balance. Water sprayed outward as both bodies disappeared beyond the drop-off. The surface churned briefly as the crocodile pulled him under. Within seconds, the area where he had stood showed only widening rings. There was no prolonged struggle at the surface. Crocodile bite force has been measured in excess of 3,000 pounds per square inch in large individuals. The animal began a rotational movement commonly called a death roll. Such rolling is used to destabilize prey and can fracture bone or tear muscle, especially when the bite is anchored in the pelvis or upper leg. The water surface churned as sediment rose from the bottom. Large crocodiles typically attempt to drown prey quickly by holding it underwater. Loss of consciousness from forced submersion can occur within a few minutes, especially when combined with severe trauma and blood loss. Family members shouted from the shoreline. No one entered the water. Entering during an active crocodile attack carries extreme risk, and documented incidents show that additional victims can be injured when attempting rescue. The crocodile surfaced several yards from shore only briefly, with part of its head and upper back visible before it submerged again and moved toward deeper water along the channel edge. It did not thrash or remain at the surface. The initial strike and submersion occurred within seconds, while the total period during which surface disturbance and brief resurfacing were visible extended to roughly 1 to 2 minutes before the water fully settled. A lodge employee who witnessed the event from a nearby raised walkway immediately called emergency services, providing the exact location along the estuary bank. At the same time, another adult ran inland toward a ranger post to alert on-site personnel. The path between the shoreline and the nearest access road crossed uneven ground, covered in brush and loose sand, slowing movement. In that region, emergency response times commonly exceed 30 minutes due to distance, limited vehicle access, and the need for coordinated wildlife safety measures. First responders arrived approximately 35 minutes after the attack. By then, the water surface showed no disturbance. Search operations shifted to recovery, with trained teams scanning deeper channel sections where crocodiles typically secure prey. Sibuso's body was later located submerged near the channel edge. Medical examination documented extensive crush injuries to the pelvis and upper leg, consistent with a large crocodile bite and rotational force. Examination findings included damage to major vessels in the upper leg and significant soft tissue trauma. The report listed drowning as the primary cause of death, with traumatic injuries contributing to rapid incapacitation. The injury pattern was consistent with a single ambush and submersion. Park authorities reissued safety advisories reminding visitors that the estuary is an active crocodile habitat and that entering the water carries risk even during daylight and in the presence of others. Thanks for watching. If you like these stories, click here.